Lo and behold, the horse turns into a prince who, except for the acquiescence of the hero, would have had to remain a miserable, shaggy nag. I have noticed something else about Christian Wolf's music. All you can do is suddenly listen in the same way that when you catch cold, all you can do is suddenly sneeze. Unfortunately, European harmony. Where it is within us, but like an empty glass into which at any moment anything may be poured. Just something, finally something. Or even to be able to drink a glass of water. Unless some other idea crops up about it. That is all I have to say about structure. My present way of composing involves with the observation of imperfections in the paper on which I happen to be writing. About the prepared piano. Each prepared piano is prepared differently. Objects are placed between the strings and the piano sound to all these various characteristics. He is transformed with respect to all of its characteristics. Music is an oversimplification of the situation we actually are in. And here alone is not a being. Music is one part of theater. Focus is what aspects one's noticing. Theater is all the various things going on at the same time. I've noticed that music is liveless for me when listening, for instance, doesn't distract me from seeing. One should take music very naturally. No technique at all. Only technique worth having. I remember being asked what I thought about technique. And at first, I had nothing to say. Several days later, I realized I have no time for technique because I must always be making one. Any technique can be discovered after any technique is forgotten. Another technique I've devised is derived from the method of obtaining oracles, and a principle also which interests me not at all anymore is that which is called mobility immobility. Shh! Time, which is the title of this piece, so many minutes, so many seconds, is what we and sounds happen in, whether early or late, in it. It is not a question of counting. Our poetry now is the realization that we possess nothing. Anything, therefore, is a delight, since we do not possess it, and that thus need not fear. This composition involves a flexible use of the number 10,000, that is to say 100 times 100 square root. The actual time lengths are changing. This work has no score, it should be abolished. A statement concerning the arts is no statement concerning the arts. It consists of single parts. Any of them may be played together or eliminated, and at any time. To me, teaching is an expedient, but I do not teach external science. Like a long book, if a long book is like a mobile. To ignore it because of their attachment to existence ceases unsignified or signified. No beginning, no ending. Harmony, so-called, is a fourth abstract vertical relation which blots out the spontaneous transmitting nature of each of the sounds forced into it. It is artificial and unrealistic. Form, then, is not something off in the distance in solitary confinement. It is right here, right now. Since it is something we say about past actions, it is wise to drop it. This, too, giving me some ideas, quest of today, Nostromo, up by the wall, hero, questioning thus. They proceed thus by chance, by no will of their own passing, safely, through many perilous situations. I begin to hear the old sounds, the ones I had thought worn out by intellectualization. I begin to hear the old sounds as though they are not worn out. Silence, like music, is non-existent. There always are sounds. That is to say, if one is alive to hear them. Obviously, they are not. Whether I make them or not, there are always sounds to be heard, and all of them are excellent. We bake a cake, and it turns out that the sugar was not sugar, but salt. Are you deaf? by nature, choice, desire? Or can you hear externals, timpani, labyrinths in whack? By no means. The 12-tone row is a method. A method is a control of each single note, their development, their climax, the recapitulation, which is the belief one may own one's own home. There is too much there. There is not enough of nothing in it. So far, I have written 2 parts for a pianist. Either part can be played alone or they can both be played together. Each piano is prepared differently, although as a matter of focus, the parts could be played without bothering to prepare the piano or pianos. If prepared, then generally the preparations will be altered in the course of the performance. The principle called mobility is this. Everything is changing, but while some things are changing, others are not. Eventually those that were not changing begin suddenly to change. Et vice versa ad infinitum. A technique to be useful, skillful that is, must be such that it fails to control the elements subjected to it, otherwise it is apt to become unclear. And listening is best in a state of mental emptiness. Composers are spoken of as having ears for music, which generally means that nothing presented to their ears can be heard by them. Their ears are walled in with sounds of their own imagination. Of 5 aspects, observe 2. The highest purpose is to have no purpose at all. This puts one in accord with nature in her manner of operation. If someone comes along and asks why, there are answers. However, there is a story I've found very helpful. What's so interesting about technique anyway? What if there are 12 tones in a row? What row? This thing of cause and effect is not emphasized, but instead one makes an identification with what is here now. He then spoke of 2 qualities, unimpededness and interpenetration. The relationship of things happening at the same time is spontaneous and irrepressible. It is you yourself, in the form you have that instant taken. To stop and figure it out takes time. The only thing. Pardon me, that I do not find. The preparation of the pianos is also determined by chance. The various materials that exist are placed in the following categories. P meaning plastics, bone, glass, etc. M meaning metal. C meaning clothes, fiber, rubber. W meaning wood, paper. X meaning other materials, special circumstances, free choices, etc. Coins are then tossed. Forms not the same twice. Sonatas, fugues, that 2 or more things happen at the same time is their relation. The beginning of this work in progress was not a part for a pianist, but curiously enough, 6 short parts, no one of them lasting much more than a minute. For a string player, that is, a 4-strings player. Sure, the things happening at different times are also related. If it needed to be clear, magnetic tape makes it perfectly so that we are not in a 12-tone or any other discrete situation. The reason I'm presently working with imperfections in paper is this. I am thus able to designate certain aspects of sound as though they were in a field, which, of course, they are. The sounds that had accidentally occurred while it was being played were in no sense an interruption, more an
more, I have the feeling that we are getting nowhere. Not wondering, am I right or doing something wrong? The preparation changes that occur during a performance are A. Simple change of position. B. Total or partial addition of objects. C. Total or partial subtraction. Nothing has been said about Bach or Beethoven. We are the oldest, makes the silence, and having our airway of knowing nowness. Years ago I asked myself, why do I write music? An Indian musician told me the traditional answer in India was to sober the mind and thus make it susceptible to divine influences. Same answer is given by some old English composer. Consider this non-dualistically. He goes by me, I see him not. He passes on, but I perceive him not. This piece is taking into consideration the physical action of playing an instrument. You won't find this in the books. Why do you not do as I do, letting go of your thoughts as though they were the cold ashes of a long dead fire? What has taken the place of the mobility principle now that I'm no longer interested in it? 3 coins that 6 times yield a hexagram, which there are 64. In this way one can establish which of 60 possibilities obtains and changes. What better technique than to leave no traces? To determine the number of imperfections in a given space, coins are tossed. That number of spots is then potentially active. Subsequent tosses determine which are actually active. Tables are arranged referring to tempi, the number of superpositions, that is to say the number of things that can go on at once. Sounds and silences, durations, loudnesses, accents. Sounds together, suffice to say. Structure is of no importance, however, I go on having it by chance to determine first the relative probability of the 3, and then to determine which of the 3 happens in the world for studying music. It doesn't seem to me to affect anything that happens in it. I'm speaking, of course, about a time structure. It simply allows anything to happen in it. What I'm calling poetry is often called content. I myself have called it form. It is the continuity of a piece of music. Continuity today when it is necessary. A fugue is a more complicated game, but it can be broken by a single sound, say from a fire engine. Now, getting sleep and so on. Very frequently no one knows that contemporary music is or could be art. He simply thinks it was irritating. Irritating one way or another, that is to say, keeping us from ossifying. It may be objected that from this point of view anything goes. Actually, anything does go, but only when nothing is taken as the basis. In an utter emptiness, anything can take place. The feeling we are getting nowhere, that is a pleasure which will continue. Why? The way to test modern painting is this. If it is not destroyed by the action of shadows, it is genuine oil painting. A cough or a baby crying will not ruin a good piece of modern music. This is its truth. As contemporary music goes on changing in the way I'm changing it, what will be done is to more and more completely liberate sounds. Of course you do know structure is the division of whatever into parts. Last year when I talked here I made a short talk. That was because I was talking about something, but this year I'm talking about nothing, and of course we'll go on. Magnetic tape music makes it clear we are in totality, actively. Upaya! Let your ears send a message of surprise or perplexity. That's the way. I was asked, Dr. Suzuki, what is the difference between men are men and Montes are Montes before studying Zen, and men are men and Montes are Montes after studying Zen? It is not a question of going into oneself or to the world. It is rather a condition of fluency that's in and out. Need I quote Blake? Certainly not. Sports are spots and skills needed to turn them to the point of practicality. Tape music requires multiple loudspeakers. And it seems to me I could listen forever to Japanese shakuhachi music or the Navajo yebiche, or I could sit or stand near Richard Lippard's Full Moon any length of time. But those beauties, formerly for me, time length was a constant. Now it too, like everything else, changes. Beginning of the 3rd unit of the 4th. Large part. Yes, it is. Masterpieces and geniuses go together, and when, by running from one to the other, we make life safer than it actually is, we are apt never to know the dangers of contemporary music. When I wrote the imaginary landscape for 12 radios, it was not for the purpose or shock or as a joke, but rather to introduce unpredictability already inherent in the situation through the tossing of coins. Chance, to be precise, is a leap, provides a leap out of reach of one's own grasp of oneself. Once done, forgotten. One thing to do with time is this. Measure it. Cultivating yourself will grant similarity with the chaos of the surrounding ether. Unloosen your minds, set your spirit free. Be still as if you had no soul. Everyone returns to its root and does not know. If they knew, they would be leaving it. Structure. Given a number of actual active points, they are an aggregate, a constellation. They can move about among themselves, and it becomes necessary to classify the kinds of aggregates, say constant and again intermittent. One can hear a sound. I wrote some music for Carillon for Mayor Carolyn Richards using different shaped scraps of paper folded and small holes cut in them at the points of folding. Then used these as stencils at points in time space each determined. If you are interested, you can read a detailed description of it that will appear in the forthcoming issue of Translate Formation. When I first touched coins, I sometimes thought, I hope such and such will turn out. Earth's no escape from heaven. How can we speak of error when it is understood? Psychology never again. It should be clear from what I'm saying that once one. Counterpoint is the same proposition as harmony, except that it is more insidious. I noticed in 1938 that some young people were still interested in it. Greater earnestness is required if one is going to solve the really important problems. My point is this: various techniques can go together all at the same time. Therefore, this work I'm using the word progress, with which in connection has no organizing technique supporting it. Giving up counterpoint, one gets superimposition. And, of course, a little counterpoint comes in of its own accord. Oh, I wouldn't know. The best thing to do about counterpoint is what Schoenberg did. Teach it. I'm still really thoroughly puzzled by this way of composing by observing imperfections in paper. It is this being thoroughly puzzled that makes it possible for me to work. I am puzzled by hearing music well played too. If I'm not puzzled, it wasn't well played. Hopelessly incomprehensible. While studying music, things get a little confused. Sounds are not longer sounds, but are letters A, B, C, D, F, G. At the end of the journey when success is almost in view, I know nothing. All I can do is say what strikes me as especially changing in contemporary music. Unfortunately, European thinking has brought it about that actual things that happen, such as suddenly listening or suddenly sneezing, are not considered profound. Not just tones, noises too. What is the physical action involved in playing an instrument? Yes. For instance, now my focus involves very little a lecture on music, my music. But it is not a lecture, nor is it music. It is of necessity, theater. What else? If I choose, as I do, music. I get theater, that is, I get that too. Not just this, the two. Art is order or expression or integration of these. It is light, to try to say, but there is darkness. What is now unheard of is an 8 loudspeaker situation, to be in the center of transmission. Sounds coming from every direction. After 8, give me 16. Where's the best position for audition? The corner where you are. It is understood that everything is clean. There's no dirt. Then why are you always taking baths? Just to dip. No why. For me, it's a matter of getting up and daily, unless commitments. That is finished now. It was a pleasure. And now. Just the same, only somewhat, as though you had your feet a little off the ground. Now at the beginning, before studying music, men are men and sounds are sounds. This causes some hesitation on the hero's part, but he finally acquiesces. One of them said, he must have lost his favorite animal. Another man said, no, it must be his friend. Do you only take the position of doing nothing and things will, of themselves, become transformed? Think for a moment about sound, how it has pitch, loudness, timbre, and duration, and how silence, which is its non-existent opposite, has only duration structure. Error is drawing a straight line between anticipation of what should happen and what actually happens. What actually happens is, however, in a total not linear situation and is responsible generally. Therefore, error is a fiction, has no reality. In fact, errorless music is written by not giving a thought to cause and effect. Any other kind of music always has mistakes in it. In other words, there is no split between spirit and matter, and to realize this, one has only suddenly to awake to the fact. This makes possible the writing of durations as 1/7 plus 1/3 plus 3/5, or fractions of quarter. This brings about an emphasis on uniqueness, so that two nearly the same durations can each be uniquely itself, just as two leaves, however much of the same tree, are not identical. If there is time, I will tell about my visit to the anechoic chamber at Harvard. It was not silent. Two sounds, one high, one low. The privileged tones that remain are arranged in Mozart scales or nowadays rows. An abstract process begins called composition. Express an idea. The only structure which permits of natural activity is one so flexible as not to be a structure. I write in order to hear, never do I hear and then write what I hear. Inspiration is not a special occasion. After studying music, men are men and sounds are sounds, and subtract. That is to say, at the beginning one can hear a sound and tell. In the direct situation, it is. If you don't like it, you may choose to avoid it. But what silence requires isn't it? What I think and what I feel can be my inspiration, but it is then also my pair of blinders. To see, one must go beyond the imagination, and for that one must stand absolutely still as though in the center of a leap. Several stories occurred to me that I should like to interpolate in the same way, by the way, that while I'm talking, the telephone keeps ringing and then contemporary conversation takes place instead of this particular way of preparing a lecture. It is high or low. Has a certain timbre and loudness. I will not disturb by my concern the structure of anything that is going to be acting. To act is a miracle and needs everything and every me out of the way. An error is simply a failure to adjust immediately from a preconception to an actuality. However, it occurs to me to say more about structure. Specifically this, we are now at the beginning. Or not. And it isn't a human being or something to look at. It is high or low, has a certain timbre and loudness, lasts a certain length of time. And it is necessary to see that there is not only a sharp distinction to be made between composing and listening, but that although all things are different, it is not their differences which are to be our concern, but rather their uniqueness and their infinite play of interpenetration with themselves and with us. There are three categories of noises in the two parts for two pianists: those produced inside the piano construction, outside the same, and accessory noises, whistles, percussions, etc. Reading music is for musicologists. There is no straight line to be drawn between notes and sounds. Vertically in the same space, any range will appear. It was originally for me a matter of flexibility by means of changing and not changing tempi. The matter reduces itself, however, to time, which is short or long, and that to a process of multiplication using a variety of multiplicants. Communication, if it is required, is a way of calling attention to one's own psychology. If permitted, it takes place of its own accord, is for all the world inevitable. If it were the same purpose as when it has to do with another leaf, it would be a coincidence, imitation of nature, from which each leaf should hold on to the complete rule, which would be free because it acts in her manner of operation. Then it will not be of its own unique position in space uniqueness, plagiarism of result, having a particular suchness, but active from before operations begin, is extremely close to being here and now. So that listening one takes as a springboard the first sound that comes along. The first something springs us into nothing, and out of that nothing arises the next something, etc., like an alternating current. Not one sound fears the silence that extinguishes it, but if you avoid it, that's a pity, because it resembles life very closely, and life and it are essentially cause for joy. People say, sometimes, timidly. Organized ways of predicting weather, say for instance it is in all of its acoustical details. For calculated theatrical activity, I would say offhand that the minimum number of necessary actions going on at once is 5. Bright people can clear up rather quickly perplexity arising from lower numbers. Modern intervals, but in order to have them, the mind had fixed it so that one had to avoid having progressions that would make one think of sounds that were not actually present to the ear. He is most utterly indebted, not one who struggles to force his idea, and who would have had to remain, I've noticed. Calculated actions that are to go on together need not have been composed in the same way. One runs the risk of falling into a marasm of idea, if one goes on composing without discovering. Turn on several radios at once. There again one has a multiple loudspeaker system. Besides actually being in space, the mind no longer can function as ABC. Theater takes place all the time wherever one is, and art simply facilitates persuading one this is the case. So this ignorance I speak of is not losing sensitive responsiveness, on the contrary, it's a question of when, now. Fleechy up or fleechy down. It acts in such a way that one can hear through a piece of music just as one can see through. Echoes, breaking, varying its speed, and synchronized. Skillful means has a good deal to do with multiple divisions of process. And here, for instance, we begin to be in a state of immobility. Anyone can see the desirability of mobility. Had I had nothing to say, it would have been different. All it is now is what it is, faster and slower. It is the space between the loudspeakers that is to be considered. From a desire for clarity, great. We carry our homes within us, which enables us to fly. Each moment presents what happens. I derived the method I use for writing music by tossing coins from the method used in the Book of Changes. It may be objected that from this point of view anything goes. Actually, anything does go, but only when nothing is taken as the basis. In an utter emptiness, anything can take place. And needless to say, each sound is unique, had accidentally occurred while it was being played, and is not informed about European history and theory. Keeping one's mind on the emptiness, on the space, one can see anything can be in it, is, as a matter of fact, in it. Where in no sense an interruption. I have noticed I needed to weigh something else. This causes some hesitation. Hero would have had to remain. Now knows he is most. Asks the hero to kill him. 3 kinds of them. It was by means of words we became subservient. The central point is everywhere, receiving and transmitting. What is passivity? Only one monk in the monastery, the oldest one, wrote a poem, but he stayed up night and day deliberating it. The other ones didn't try because they were certain the oldest one would win. When his poem finally came out, it said, continuity takes place of its own accord and things do go on at the same time. All of this is correct and true. There's no concern necessary for, say, intonation, counterpoint, scales going to and coming from. And there, when an abstract process begins called composition, that is, a composer uses the sounds to express an idea. What then are you standing up there for if you say no to all of our questions? The man on high said, I just stand. If there are no questions. This means for me knowing more and more, not what I If it is on paper, it is graphic, calligraphy. If you can hear and see it, it is. There are no answers. Then, of course, there are answers, but the final answer makes the questions seem absurd. Whereas the questions up until then seem more intelligent than the answers. Somebody asked Debussy, "Have you not lost your friend?" "No, sir, I have not lost my friend either." Is it interesting? It is and it isn't. But one thing is certain. They are, with respect to counterpoint, melody, harmony, rhythm, and any other musical methods, pointless. All that is necessary is an empty space of time and letting it act in its magnetic way. Eventually there will be so much in it that whistles. In order to apply to all of these various characteristics, he necessarily reduces to numbers. He has also found a mathematical way of making correspondence between rows. I remember as a child loving all the sounds, even the unprepared ones. I like them especially when it's self in jaws, cheeks, and tongue, and the commentary says, the most superficial way of trying to influence others is through talk. There's nothing real behind it. The influence produced by such mere tongue wagging must necessarily remain insignificant. I believe that one can arrive at directing the phenomenon of the automatism of chance, which I mistrust as facility, which is not absolutely necessary. For in the end, in interpolations and interferences between different tones, when one of them passes from timelines to pitches at the same time that another passes from intensities to attacks, etc., there is already a sufficiency of the unknown. Diminishes his love and increases his fear, and concern about what people will think. There is all the time in the world for studying music. But for living there is scarcely any time at all. For living takes place each instant. Unimpeded. There are two great dangers for magnetic tape. One is music, although history is thinking about it, and the other is feeling obliged to have an instrument. One is specific to it, everyone, 1954, and the other, organ music. If you're interested, you can read a detailed description of it. If there are 10 things to do and I only do 2 of them, focus have changed. In his ear, where he will find a metal ball to toss it on the road in front of them, so that as the horse goes on to say, we may be led by it, this to giving himself. Is there anything else to say about structure? Yes, it goes on supporting everything. Its only difficulty lies when the struggle support is already in process. Fearing what? Any kind of paper will do for seeing spots in it. When one gets around to copying on the second sheet what was given by a first, it becomes clear. What? Magnetic tape as being all interesting can disappear. There are rumors of machines and cards. Let us move, however, for unpredictability. A structure is like a bridge from nowhere. If something with respect to something else happens, sooner or later everything is different, but essentially nothing of any permanent importance has happened. I am talking, and contemporary music is changing. Like life, it changes. If it were not changing, it would be dead. That is why chance enters for me so largely into my means, which are skillful. It is at the point of potentiality. I am working now to work without charts, without any support in total space. I see now by many slow transitions, one of which is tempo-like streams, varying and not varying, that as long as one discriminates, as I formerly did, problems remain. Each one of us is thinking his own thoughts, his own experience, and each experience is changing. And while we are thinking to get yourself in such a state of confusion that you think that the sound is not something to hear, but rather something to look at, I'm happy about all the experiences I've had with the prepared piano. For one thing, it showed me how different two pianos are from one another, and music, so-called, makes us think two pianos are the same. It isn't true. It is tossed out. It just happened that the series of numbers which are at the basis of this work add up to 100 times 100, which is 10,000. This is pleasing momentarily. The world, the 10,000 things. But the title is simply minutes and seconds. Question to ask you: how do you need to cautiously proceed in dualistic terms? A, B. Just as going from here to Egypt is a single trip but a more or less complex series of experiences, or just as Chinese characters are, some written with one stroke but others with two or several or many, and not in the way we need for living. For instance, someone said art should come from overhead. There was a social calendar and hours for breakfast, but one day I saw a cardinal and the same day heard a woodpecker. I also met Meister Eckhart. Of course, Kansas. Arizona is more interesting. I have nothing to say and I'm saying it, and that is poetry. It is no longer a case of moving along stepping stones, scales of any degree, series of no matter what, but one can move or just appear to at any point in this total space long enough to see the end of this craze for Bach. A pupil once said to me, I understand what you say about Beethoven, and I think I agree, but I have a very serious question to ask you. How do you feel about Bach? Now we have come to the end of the part about structure. Now we have come to the end of the part about structure. That two or more things happen at the same time is, it is entirely possible for something to relationship, synchronicity. That break, for instance, means at the center moving out in all directions, and then time is clearly, should one stop and mend it? Luminous, it could not be easily otherwise. Go wrong. And machines are never synchronous, not even the synchronous ones. If you need several things at once, use one as the basis and one motor. To be and be the present. Would it be a repetition? Only if we thought we owned it, but since we don't, it is free and so are we. Most anybody knows about the future and how uncertain it is. A sound is a sound. To realize this, one has to put a stop to studying music. The most enlivening thing about magnetic tape is this: whether we actually do it or not, everything we do, say what we are doing, is affected radically by it. Rhythm is not arithmetic, and so is this unfinished work. So far for two pianists, string players, lecturer, lines of demarcation are okay when they have to do with potentiality. It must be clearly understood they have nothing. A sound accomplishes nothing. Without it, life would not last out the instant. It is only irritating to think one would like to be somewhere else. Here we are now. It becomes gradually clear to us dull-witted musicians that interpenetration means that each one of these most honored ones of all is moving out in all directions, penetrating and being penetrated no matter what the time. Research would then take place in the field of music as it takes place normally in other fields. Energizing, whether for her will or for her woe. Testing pictures, Can they support action of shadows? I have been satisfied for some time with 1 to 64. There's no way of telling how long this will continue. I could go back to 2 or... One loudspeaker seems sufficient, and so are 2 or 3 or 4. 5 is where it seems to be to begin. What begins is our inability to comprehend that, on the contrary, turns out to be very controlled. In using tables in general, or a series of tables, I believe one can arrive at direct. Form is what interests everyone. Unfortunately, it is wherever you are, and there is no place where it isn't. Highest truth, that is. Eventually, everything will be happening at once. Nothing behind the screen unless the screen happens to be in front. It will increasingly be a thump instead of a back. The thing to do is to gather up one's ability to respond and go on at varying speeds, following, of course, the general outlines of the Christian life. I myself tend to think of catching trains more than Christianity. Insisting on stimulating activity, though. Without a multiple loudspeaker system, all becomes music and submissiveness. But fortunately, the piano is there and one can always prepare it in a different way. Otherwise, it would become an instrument. It is like, as Artaud said, a disease. No avoiding and not having an idea about it. The thing to do is to keep the head alert but empty. Things come to pass arising and disappearing. There can then be no consideration of error. Things are always going wrong. We are apt never to know. But something else is happening. I'm getting nowhere slowly as the talk goes on slowly. We have the feeling we are getting nowhere. There's a pleasure which will continue if we are irritated with whatever. This goes to explain what he means when he says that he is associated with all of the sounds and so can foresee what will happen, even though he has not written the particular notes down at room temperature as other composers do. And I've noticed something else about most anyone's music that can be accomplished to increase the unpredictability already inherent in the situation. The control must be at one point only and so placed that it has no effect on anything that happens. A technique which results in no technique, etc. Of course the answer is time, and since we have them, chronometers, I mean use them, or you may leave it forever and never return. Play my piece for bells. Whether I hear it or not is of no consequence, but until someone does, music is at a standstill. Before I die, I shall leave a will, because if you want something done, sentimentality is effective. I haven't the slightest idea of what is good in the world, but instead quite passively and often against what might be considered better judgment, accepts what happens. I find that it is important to take a multiplicity of steps. A story is told about an Irish hero that he's required by a jealous mother-in-law to go to some distant island. At all costs, inspiration must be avoided, which is to say, act in such a way that the inspiration doesn't come up as an alternative, but exists eternally. Then, of course, it is theater, and music disappears entirely into the realm of art where it knows it belongs. Art silence is not real silence, and the difference is continuity versus interpenetration. This is also... Music is simply trying things out in school fashion to see what happens. Etudes, making it easier but not real. Theater is the only thing that comes near what it is. This means for me knowing more and more, not what I think a sound is, but what it actually is in all of its acoustical details, and then letting the sound exist, itself changing in a changing sonorous environment. The way it does it is by the intimacy of multiplicity and emptiness. The mind has nothing in it, but everything else is busy, and there is not an instant lost in doing what must be done. Later on, if you wish, you can read about mobility and immobility. To repeat, I'm no longer interested in it, I'm interested in asymmetry. If one feels protective about the word music, protect it and find another word for all the rest that enters through the ears. It's a waste of time to trouble oneself with words, noises. What it is theater, and we are in it and like it, making it. But beware. Here we are now at the middle of the fourth large part of this talk.
There is no such thing as silence. Something is always happening that makes a sound. No one can have an idea. Once he starts really listening, it is very simple but extra urgent. The Lord knows whether or not. The next. Forever. Now? Hearing or making this in music is not different. Only simpler than living this way. Simple, that is. For me, because it happens. No error, and no wondering about what's next. Going lively on through many a perilous situation. Was it later he was discovered? And what is your purpose in writing music? I do not deal in purposes, I deal with sounds. What sounds are those? I make them just as well by sitting quite still looking for mushrooms. Growing fast in sawdust.